Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, last week we saw British Gas raise energy bills by more than 10%. That's going to affect about 3 million of its customers. Many other providers doing the same, of course. Now, before the election, the Prime Minister pledged to cap tariffs. That's been weakened somewhat since she lost her majority, so now an independent review into the costs has been ordered. Is that the right thing to do? Well, let's talk now to Lawrence Slade, who's Chief Executive of Energy UK. That's the trade body that represents the energy companies. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think a review will achieve?
Well, firstly, I think it's absolutely right, because we're committed to reducing the carbon in our economy, to decarbonising our economy, if you like. But it's absolutely critical that we do that in the most cost-effective way. So I hope the review is going to shine a light on that, but make sure it's very clear to everyone that we're committed to decarbonising our economy, but we also let's make use of all the technologies we've got available to us to do it in the cheapest way possible.
Yeah, but people are looking to this review to look at costs, in effect. I mean, that's what we as customers, the customers that we have to be, are looking for, is to find some reason why the costs keep going up when we know, the wholesale prices are coming down at the moment. We're looking for this for an explanation, aren't we?
Well, I think as part of the explanation of why we're doing the review actually said yesterday when it was announced, it's also part of shining a light on the construction of bills, on how our bills are made up, but also looking at how we can use our energy in a more smart fashion, how we can actually use less of it, be more efficient in how we're using it, but also how we can harness some of the really exciting new technologies that are coming along that means actually we can get a lot more out of our energy per pound that we spend.
And on the surface, that sounds very good. But it wasn't part of the excuse last week, or I shouldn't say excuse, I should say the reasoning from British Gas was green taxes, which we don't think are going to be looked at in this review, are they? But also the rollout of things like smart meters, this very technology which we're being told will help us reduce costs, but we're having to pay for it now.
Well, I think actually, if you look back at numbers from the Committee on Climate Change, for example, you can actually see that our bills are coming down over time. And I think what's really important that comes out of this conversation we're having is to understand how actually we're using less energy. But yes, there is a cost associated with delivering some of these benefits, but the goal is making sure that we are in more control of our energy consumption, whether you're an industry company or whether you're a domestic household, so that you can use that energy more efficiently, it's supplied to you at a cheaper level, and we've got that element of control over it.
I mean, look, what people want to see a reduction in energy prices. Now, we could have this review. It seems like there's so many reviews, so many recommendations in terms of what energy companies should be doing, but ultimately energy companies aren't listening. They aren't bringing those prices down. As Stephen was saying in regards to British Gas, they're not bringing those prices down, not just British Gas, the other big 6 companies as well. That's what people want to see. And at the end of this review, what are energy companies going to do? If there are recommendations to bring those prices down, will energy firms do anything about that?
Well, the review's not looking at the recommendations in that regard. There's work going on with the regulator at the moment to look at actually how we can support vulnerable customers, for example.
Just vulnerable customers, why not all customers?
Well, the other part of this is, actually, you mentioned 6 companies. One of the things I think we need to make more noise about is there's actually 60 companies where you can pick and choose your electricity and gas supply from. 60 companies. The competition in this market is getting more and more every year. Last year, for example, nearly 5 million households chose to change their energy supply, and that is a way you can save an immense amount of money every year. But also the point that we really need to get across is by harnessing some of these new technologies, be it solar panels on your roof or battery storage, we can actually use our energy in a totally different way, and ultimately that will reduce cost. But the competitive pressures are there, the technological developments are there. What the review needs to do is see how we can bring all those different elements together to make sure that as a country we benefit from low prices.
Yeah, but listening to that, and I'm sure for a lot of people at home are going to think, this sounds so totally confusing. Why can the whole thing just not be simpler? I mean, even down to things like, you said the big six versus the other 56, 54. Why is it that some of the smaller companies, if you go on these switch websites, are actually producing, can provide your gas and electricity for a lot less than the big six? Why is there this disparity? Why can't the big six actually be being more competitive in the market that was designed to be competitive?
Well, I think actually the thing you're seeing is, because there are so many players in the market now, you are seeing those cost pressures being brought to bear. And I think that's the challenge that all these companies have now.
No. OK. Lawrence Slade, appreciate your time, your views on that this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
The government may have abandoned its manifesto pledge to cap energy prices, but today it announced an independent review into what the industry charges. It'll look specifically at how to keep prices down for households and businesses while ensuring the UK meets its climate change targets. Well, the announcement comes just days after the country's biggest supplier, British Gas, announced a 12.5% hike in electricity prices. Well, Energy UK, which represents suppliers, welcomed the review.
What we need to be doing is making sure that we're using our energy in the most efficient way. That's the first part. But then secondly, to make sure that we're using the best technologies to bring those prices down. And actually, if you look at the figures from the Committee on Climate Change, for example, you can see that at the prices we're paying today are actually less than the prices we were paying back in 2008. So that's the message I think we really want to get out of here, that we're working with government, industry, everyone, tremendously hard to take carbon out of our economy and to deliver the best possible prices to consumers and industry.
Let's get more on this and go live to Westminster and our correspondent Lewis Goodall. And Lewis, the government repeatedly saying they don't want prices to be extortionate for customers, and yet they continue to go up.
That's right, it has been a thorny issue for both this government and David Cameron's government, really stretching all the way back till 2013, when there really were some very steep price rises. At the time, you might remember Ed Miliband, then leader of the Labour Party, said that if Labour were elected, they would have an energy price freeze. At the time, David Cameron said that was Marxism. And then during the general election, we find that Theresa May was advocating something that actually looked pretty similar in terms of a cap on the increases that the standard tariffs could go up to, and this review will not be considering that. But let's take a look at actually what this review is all about. So the government said that it's commissioned this review because they're committed to reducing carbon emissions by at least 80% by 2050 compared to 1990 levels. They admit, though, that this will need large amounts of investment in new energy sources and greener vehicles. So this review will look at the most cost-effective way to do this for consumers and the government. It will consider the implications of changing demand, including the shift to electric vehicles, robotics and artificial intelligence. But as I say, crucially, it won't consider a blanket cap on energy price rises, something the Conservatives had indeed promised during the general election. Now, obviously, that will disappoint many people and many consumer groups, but I think the blunt truth of it is the reason why it's not going to be part of this review is because I think there'll be a lot of worry within Downing Street that they wouldn't be able to get it past and through Conservative backbenchers, many of whom are instinctively very wary of the state getting back involved in the energy sector, which is, of course, now almost entirely privatised, and something that the Conservatives and Theresa May and her Chief of Staff, Nick Timothy, who wrote the Conservative manifesto, got a lot of criticism for in the immediate aftermath of the general election, was that they weren't conservative enough, that there was too many Labour ideas and state meddling. So I think that they would be reluctant to try and put that idea of a freeze back before the Commons, when many Conservative MPs would be wary of it and many Labour MPs would be quite keen on it, and the government might only get it through as a result of Labour votes. So it's an embarrassment I think that they just don't really want right now, and therefore we're getting this rather pared down review, which will, we think, report later in the year.
OK, Lewis, thank you. Let's get more on the announcement that the government has set up an independent review into the cost of energy. It'll look specifically at how to keep prices down for homes and businesses as the industry continues to invest in green technology. Will Hodson is the founder of The Big Deal, which was set up to broker a new deal between suppliers and consumers through collective switching. He's in our central London studio. Good afternoon to you. First of all, your thoughts on this review. Will it have any impact?
If it has any impact at all, it'll take place many years from now. And that offers cold comfort for families who have seen their energy prices going up. British Gas announced a price rise this week. So after all the talk we had earlier this year of a price cap, you definitely are left with the impression now of a government that's kicking the can down the road.
And how exactly can they keep costs down if they are introducing this energy tariff?
How can British Gas keep those costs down? It's hard to say. It's important to decouple two concepts here. One is energy costs, which are faced by energy companies, and the other one's energy prices that are paid by consumers. Now, obviously, there's a relationship between the two, but the government has the move focus now onto costs facing energy companies, and therefore they're not looking at the markup on those costs that companies are putting on the prices paid by the most loyal customers. And that's been the crisis in the consumer market.
So what exactly can the government do to try and stop these prices going up and up? Because they've talked about it for many years, haven't they?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because funnily enough, there was a good idea on the table just a few months ago. That was a price cap, one of the very few policies that in fact united both Labour and Conservatives. We talked about capping bills for all consumers, so as to put an end to a situation where people were paying 30, 40, even 50% more for their energy than their neighbour, just because they were too loyal and too trusting of their energy supplier to switch. That cap should be brought back.
OK, and British Gas announcing that it's rising its prices when it's made, of course, significant profits. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
Well, very interesting that when the review of costs was announced, they talked about separating facts from fiction around the costs being faced by suppliers. Now, British Gas this week blamed costs around policy and transmission for their inevitable price rise. Immediately, the government said, that's not true. Policy costs cannot explain this. Ofgem had published a report saying even transmission costs could not explain the price rises. So actually getting a bit of transparency, independence, and a kind of sense check on the excuses trotted out by energy companies is crucial. Because otherwise, there is a danger that this new focus on costs, as if they're unbearable and overwhelming, could allow certain energy companies to introduce more price rises in the weeks and months ahead.
But of course, we are focusing on having a greener planet, and the government have to look at that as well, don't they? So it's kind of balancing things, really.
They should. We've been making efforts in that department for years. There's no reason that Britain can't deliver an energy system that is affordable and sustainable, and we should keep doing that.
Indeed. OK, thanks very much. Appreciate your time on that.
Thank you.
The government says it wants an independent review of the cost of energy, just days after British Gas raised standard electricity prices by 12.5%. Theresa May in June's election had pledged to cap energy prices but shelved the plans after losing her Conservative majority. Now the Business Secretary Greg Clark says the review will look at how prices can be kept low while ensuring the UK meets climate change targets. Here's our business correspondent Joe Lynham.
How much we pay for our energy to run our households and companies always ignites our passions.
Policies like capping energy prices to support working families.
That's why Theresa May promised a price cap and an independent probe into the energy sector before the general election. The cap may have been shelved, but this Oxford University professor, Dieter Helm, has only 3 months to find out where any fat can be trimmed from our energy bills. He says he'll sort all the facts from the myths about pricing and costs. But some consumer groups are sceptical.
Prices are a very real problem for families across Britain, and it's a very urgent problem. Now, this review is going to deliver benefits in years' time, if it delivers benefits at all. So people are left with the feeling of a government that's kicking the can down the road.
And for some households, it's not clear whether this review will be the green light for lower bills.
How would that help families like myself? I'm a single mother. Or even families who struggle with day-to-day childcare and other issues. So I personally don't think it's a very vital service. You need electricity.
It's a slow process, like it can't just happen at the click of a finger. It's a case of that they'll have to go away, review it and come back, and if they have promised that price cap, then obviously they should deliver on it.
There are many stages in the energy value chain, but the main ones include buying gas and electricity on wholesale markets. That accounts for 36% of a typical bill. Moving it through pipes and cables, known as distribution, accounts for 29% of a typical bill. But 13% of our bills also includes subsidies for poorer households and the cost of developing Britain's renewable or green energy supplies. The rest is made up of operational costs and VAT. Tom Burke, who used to advise Labour and Conservative governments on energy policy, says there's not much that can be achieved by Dieter Helm in a 3-month timeframe.
I think a review this short is essentially headline management. I don't think Dieter, heroic though he is going to be able to come up with something that isn't already widely discussed inside the energy community, where we know that the quickest and cheapest way to drive bills down is to improve the efficiency of our buildings.
After British Gas said it would be raising its standard electricity prices by 12.5%, this energy probe will allow the government to say that it's not tone deaf in the face of rising prices. Joe Lynham, BBC News.
Well, our chief political correspondent Vicky Young is here. Vicky, is this a real attempt to help consumers, do you think?
Well, I think compared to that promise from the Conservatives during the election to have a price cap, then a review obviously doesn't sound as if it's going to help much. Theresa May talked a lot about helping families who are just about managing. But even though many customers feel the market isn't working for them, they've clearly drawn back very much from the idea of intervening, because many Conservatives don't like the idea of it at all. I do think with government reviews, it is always worth looking at the person they have put in charge of the review. So Dieter Helm has been very outspoken about what he sees as the high cost of subsidies to the renewables. So when it comes to wind farms and solar energy, he thinks it's just too expensive. He's also spoken out against nuclear power stations, saying that he thinks they may not even be any more built after Hinkley, because again, it's such a complex web you have to get through in order to build them, and again, too expensive. So it is possible that this review might mean as a shift towards gas, for example, a change in government policy. But I think when it comes to what ministers are saying about all of this, they're emphasising that they have spoken to Ofgem. They are urging Ofgem to use existing powers to help those, particularly from lower incomes, to protect them, to get them onto better tariffs. But I think the ultimate advice, as ever, and for the foreseeable future, is if you want to get your bills down, you've got to switch supplier.
OK, Vicky, many thanks. Vicky Young.
Now, how to cut down energy bills while still meeting targets on climate change. That's the challenge for a new independent review tasked with examining ways of controlling costs. The study, commissioned by the government, comes days after British Gas hiked its electricity prices by 12.5%. It will look at issues from efficiency to regulation, but not one key government pledge: capping prices. Harry Smith reports.
The government has flagged its latest announcement as proof of its determination to tackle rising energy prices, with an expert panel which will look at all the options for the future. But critics say it falls well short of Theresa May's manifesto pledge to cap domestic bills. The review will be led by Oxford professor Dieter Helm, who's known to be sceptical about some renewable energy projects. However, he said today his review would be independent and sort out the facts from the myths.
So what we've got here on Bannister House Estate is one of the most ambitious community solar rooftop projects.
John Burke is the Labour councillor leading a project in the London Borough of Hackney to install solar panels on the roofs of its buildings. They own more than half in the borough. He has mixed feelings about today's announcement.
Well, I think that Professor Helm is obviously a very eminently qualified academic in this field. Frankly, he's got the unenviable task of providing the government with an answer to an impossible question, which is to provide the very arbitrary cheapest energy prices in Europe alongside a necessarily ambitious decarbonisation programme.
Hackney is only one of many councils around the country experimenting with schemes like this. They say the government could do much to change the rules and encourage local generated power.
Our ambition is only limited by the roof space that we have in Hackney at the moment, which is 50% of all the roof space in the borough. This is obviously a community energy scheme, but longer term we want to become a municipal supplier and generator of energy in the borough, and that's very exciting. It allows us the opportunity to contribute towards the decarbonisation of the UK economy, the UK's energy supply, and also to provide benefits to our local residents.
They may get the answers they want. The head of the new review panel is not a fan of wind power. But one organisation which helps consumers negotiate better deals with suppliers says this review falls well short of expectations.
it could well serve as a distraction. This is about the costs facing energy companies, and it's not about the prices facing energy consumers right now. And you're left with the impression of a government that's kicking the can down the road. We don't know how long it's going to take, but looking back, most of the reports that have come in over the last few years in energy haven't actually seen their recommendations brought to life. We had the Competitions and Market Authority, who were roundly ignored by the government when they announced their manifesto. In that manifesto, the government promised people a price cap. Now that price cap has been dropped. So in fact, there's little chance that anything that comes out of this strategic review actually has an impact.
The review is expected to publish its findings in the autumn. By then, with British Gas announcing big increases last week, anxiety over household bills and political pressure on the government to act is likely to be growing.
Harry Smith reporting.